In these final hours before Apollo 17, some people are gloomy about the future of space exploration. Not among them is Dr. Wernher von Braun, the retired rocket expert who developed the big Saturn launch vehicles and used to send men on their way to the moon. I talked with Dr. von Braun earlier this evening.
We will go to the moon again. There may be a 10-year gap or so, but when we do return to the moon, we will go there with our reusable space shuttle, with probably a reusable two-stage tug to fly from low Earth orbit onto lunar orbit and land even on the moon itself with a vehicle that can return to a lunar orbit to be fueled up and do that portion of the trip also repeatedly. The net result will be that transportation cost to the lunar surface will be down to maybe 1/10 of what Apollo demands. And so we can really think of far more ambitious lunar surface missions, such as a semi-permanent installation on the moon, or traverses across the entire face of the moon, maybe of several thousand miles length, where would land the crew in one corner of the moon to pick it up a few weeks later in another location. I think all good things have an ending, and I consider Apollo a little bit, as it were, as the sailing ship and dog sled area to the South Pole. Well, next time we'll go to the South Pole, we'll go by turboprop airplane.
Mm-hmm. You said 10 years or so. You don't really expect anything like that in 10 years. You're talking a much longer period than
Not
that.
necessarily. You see, the reusable space shuttle will be available in 1978 with first successful flights, and it can very definitely be an operational vehicle by 1980, which is 8 years away, and 2 more years will suffice to go back to the moon with the tug that is carried into orbit by the shuttle. So I'm not at all pessimistic.
Well, what is it in our makeup that is possible for us to get excited about an Apollo 11, man's first step on the moon, and within 2 short years of that time, be as blasé as the public seems to be today about well, this particular launch and the space program generally?
Well, I think it's the excitement of the new. I mean, it's like getting married, you know, and being married. The love is still there and the excitement is still there, but it's no longer the honeymoon.
We'll be back to begin CBS News live coverage of the nighttime launch of Apollo 17 at 9:41 Eastern Time.
The astronauts have been sleeping late for the past few days, adjusting to the time schedule of an after-dark launch. They had physical examinations this afternoon, finished dinner about half an hour ago, and are now on their way to the spacecraft. Here's Jim Hartz on that part of the story. Jim?
At 13 minutes before 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, precisely 3 hours before the liftoff, the astronauts emerged from their crew quarters 5 miles from the pad and started toward the launch complex. Eugene Cernan led the way, and he stopped briefly to say hello to his wife, Barbara, and his son. Ron Evans was next. His wife, Jan, was there with their 2 children. They tried in vain to kiss, but the astronaut's space helmet got in the way. Dr. Harrison Schmitt came out last. He isn't married, and his parents, who wanted to be here for the launch, could not. Evans made a confident gesture with his hand before they got on board the van. Cernan briefly turned as if he wanted to get out. Someone outside said no. The door was closed, and a moment later, the van drove off. The men received well wishes from President Nixon by phone last night, and Vice President Spiro Agnew is here at Cape Kennedy tonight to watch the launch. A lot of other VIPs are gathered to see it, too. A large crowd, perhaps 500,000 to 1 million people, is gathered on highways and causeways around the Cape. But no one is more concerned about the success of the flight and the safety of the men than their families, who saw them for the last time tonight. John?
Gene Cernan, the commander of Apollo 17, the last of the manned moon flights, said recently, "This is not the end of spaceflight. This is just the conclusion of the beginning. We're not putting our rockets in the barn and closing the door," he said. "We're just beginning to understand and accept the challenge that the universe has for us." Yet, even Cernan admits that his is perhaps the last moon flight of this century. We'll be back at 9:45 Eastern Time to